The wind carried dust across the open plains, turning the late afternoon sky into a hazy gold as Bria Holloway trudged along the dirt road. Her boots, one borrowed, one found, had worn thin after nearly a week of walking. She'd crossed half of Texas with nothing but determination, a canvas satchel, and the memory of the storm that had taken everything she owned. That storm still haunted her. One violent night of thunder and a collapsed barn had left her jobless at the trading post where she'd worked as a seamstress and caretaker. She had no home, no savings, and no family willing to take her in. But she did have one thing left: skills. Bria could cook, sew, break a horse if needed, and work harder than any ranch hand twice her size. If she could just find a place willing to hire a woman, she might finally have a new start, and that's when she saw it: Blackstone Ranch. Miles of fencing stretched across rolling hills, cattle grazing like dark dots against the horizon. A tall entrance arch made of weathered rails marked the property line, a carved iron plate swinging loosely in the wind. The place looked tough. Established, owned by someone who didn't hire strangers lightly. Still, if any ranch in these parts had work, it would be this one. She hesitated at the gate, brushing dust from her sleeves. She didn't exactly look employable, clothes torn from travel, hair tangled from dry winds, cheeks sunburned. But turning back wasn't an option. She squared her shoulders and walked forward. The first person to spot her was a ranch hand riding patrol along the fence line. He slowed his horse, eyes narrowing with caution rather than hostility. Travelers weren't uncommon, but lone women with no wagon raised questions fast. "You lost, miss?" he called out. "Not lost," she answered, forcing her voice steady. "Looking for work." The ranch hand raised a brow, studying her boots, her satchel, her posture. She didn't flinch under his scrutiny. She'd dealt with worse eyeing back in town. "You'll want to talk to the owner," he finally said. "But just know he don't hire easy." Bria nodded. She didn't expect easy. The rider turned and whistled sharply toward the distant homestead. Moments later, a second rider emerged one sharper in silhouette, broad-shouldered, straight-backed, with a confident grip on the reins. As he approached, Bria caught her first glimpse of him. Colt Blackstone. His presence alone was intimidating. Sun-tanned skin, a jaw lined with stubble, dark hair peeking beneath the brim of his hat. Not just a rancher someone used to command. He didn't smile when he arrived. He simply dismounted in a fluid motion and looked her over, not with lust or judgment, but with the same measuring gaze he'd give a wild horse assessing spirit, strength, and whether she was trouble. "You're a long way from town," he said. "What brings you here? Work?" she replied, chin lifted. "I can cook, clean, stitch, break horses if I need to. I work cheap and I work well." Colt studied her hands, rough, calloused, marked from labor. "You travel alone?" "Yes." Dangerous choice. It was that or starve. Her answer seemed to shift something in him, not pity, but respect. Still, he didn't look convinced. "I don't hire people out of desperation," he said. "Folks make desperate choices. Dangerous ones." Bria met his eyes, unwavering. "I'm not desperate. I'm capable. There's a difference." A slow, almost reluctant smirk touched his lips. Not mocking, impressed. "All right," he said finally. "You want a chance? You'll earn it. We rise before dawn. Show me you can keep up." It wasn't a promise, but it was a beginning. As the sun dipped low, Bria stepped through the ranch gate, not as charity, not as a wanderer, but as someone who was ready to prove she belonged. The frontier didn't owe her a future, but here, on this land, she finally had a shot at one. The ranch stirred long before sunrise. Smoke drifted from the cookhouse chimney. Horses stamped their hooves impatiently in the corral, and dew-soaked grass shimmered in pale moonlight. Bria woke in the spare bunkhouse with stiff shoulders and dust still clinging to her hair, but even exhaustion couldn't dull her determination. She'd been given a chance, even if just for a day. She refused to waste a dot. By the time she stepped outside, the ranch hands were already moving. Some led cattle toward water troughs, others patched fencing or carried tools toward the barn. She noticed quickly that she was the only woman among them. The looks she received weren't unkind, just curious and cautious. Outsiders didn't last long on Blackstone land, especially ones who came unannounced. Colt Blackstone stood near the stables, boots braced against the fence, sipping coffee from a steel mug. Even in the dim morning light, he looked like the kind of man carved from the landscape itself. He didn't greet Bria with a smile, he simply nodded, acknowledging her presence without ceremony. "You can start by helping saddle the horses," he said. "We've got a cattle drive up North Ridge. Stay sharp and don't get underfoot. No hand-holding. No gentle treatment." Exactly how she preferred it. Bria tied her hair back and went to work. She moved with practiced speed, checking straps, brushing coats, avoiding kicks and startled snorts. One of the ranch hands, Tom, a lanky boy with straw-colored hair, watched her in mild surprise. "You sure you ain't one of them city girls that gives up after a day?" he asked. Bria tightened the cinch strap and shot him a sharp look. "City girls don't smell like horse sweat and creek water." Tom blinked, then laughed. "All right then, you'll fit in fine." But if the ranch hands were warming to her, Colt remained harder to read. Later that morning, the crew rode out to check fencing along the North Ridge. Colt rode at the front, posture straight, scanning the land with the keen eye of someone who'd spent decades reading every rock and shadow as if it spoke to him. Bria rode behind him, her seat steady in the saddle despite the challenging terrain. She'd hoped to keep her head down and simply work, but the slow ride allowed silence to turn into curiosity and curiosity into questions. "You from around here?" Colt asked without looking back. "No. Born east. Drifted west for opportunities." That was the safe version. The full story was heavier, wrapped in loss she wasn't ready to spill. Colt nodded. "Most people drift west trying to outrun something. And you?" she countered. "Were you born here?" He hesitated, just long enough that she caught it. "This land's been Blackstone land for generations," he said finally. "My father ran it, his father before him. I took over when the old man passed." There was weight in those words, not pride alone, but responsibility. Burdens inherited, promises kept even when they cost something. Bria softened. "That's a lot to carry." Colt didn't respond. Instead, he halted his horse near a broken section of fence. The barbed wire had been cut clean, not torn. A sign of trespassers or rustlers. His jaw hardened. This land's more than cattle and pasture. It's legacy. People tried to take pieces of it every year. Bria watched as he dismounted, gloves on, retying wire with methodical precision. He worked with a quiet intensity. That spoke of discipline and of pain held tightly in the chest, never shown. She realized then that his caution toward her wasn't about her being a stranger. It was about trusting someone new with a place that meant everything to him. This ranch wasn't just income. It was identity, family, memory. And if she stayed, she would be stepping into a world where loyalty wasn't optional, it was the only currency. By midday, as the sun burned high and a hawk circled overhead, Colt finally spoke again. "You worked hard today," he said. "Most folks break before noon." Bria wiped sweat from her brow. "I don't break easy." He studied her, eyes narrowing. With a mix of curiosity and admiration feelings he clearly wasn't used to allowing. "We'll see," he murmured, but there was something else behind those words. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people, both carrying pasts and hiding wounds, had begun circling each other on land that demanded strength, and neither knew just how tangled their lives were about to become. By the time the riders returned from the North Ridge, the sun had dropped low, casting long shadows across the valley. Dust clung to Bria's skin, her muscles burned from the ride, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. Yet something deeper fueled her, tight, glowing pride. She had kept pace with men who expected her to quit before sunrise. Back at the ranch yard, hands dismounted and led horses to water. Bria loosened her reins and slid from the saddle, but before she could remove the blanket, a sudden shrill cry erupted from the far corral. A young stallion, coal-black and fiery, thrashed wildly inside the pen. His eyes rolled white as he bucked, rope halter tangled around his neck. Two ranch hands struggled to hold him, boots sliding in the dirt. Bronco spooked again. One shouted, "Give him room." Another yelled back, but backing away only made the horse rear harder, hooves slicing the air. If he snapped free, someone could be trampled, or he could break his own leg, and panicked Colt strode forward. Jaw set, but before he could issue an order, Bria moved. She slipped through the fence rails with fluid precision, hands raised, palms open, body calm. The ranch hands froze. "Girl, get back," Tom shouted. "That horse'll kill you." Bria ignored him. She stepped slowly, keeping her step soft, breath measured. She didn't charge, didn't demand control. She offered trust. The stallion snorted, lunged once more, then stopped, ears flicking toward her voice. "That's it," she whispered. Not trapped, just scared. With a subtle motion, she reached for the halter rope, loosening the knot where it had twisted tight against his jaw. When the rope fell slack, the horse dropped his head and exhaled a heavy, trembling breath. Silence fell over the corral. Bria smoothed her hand down the stallion's neck. "There you go, easy." The ranch hand stared as if she'd cast a spell. Tom finally muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." Colt's voice broke the silence, low and controlled. "You handle horses like someone who's lived around them." Bria didn't turn to face him. She kept her hand on the horse until he calmed fully. "I learned early. Animals trust what people don't." Only then did she step back through the rails. Colt studied her with a new expression, no longer assessing her as labor, but as a force on his land, something he hadn't expected. Later, in the barn's shade, Colt leaned against a post while Bria helped store tack. The scent of leather and hay filled the air. The world softened in the dim light. Finally, he spoke again. "You rode well today. Handled that bronco better than most men here." Bria wiped her forehead with her sleeve. "You mean I passed the test?" He shook his head slightly. "Today wasn't a test. This ranch doesn't hand out jobs you earn a place. And what you showed today," he paused, searching for the right words, "that wasn't skill. It was instinct." Then, more quietly, "You don't find that often." Bria felt her chest tighten, not from pride, but fear of hope. "So I have the job?" Colt didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, boots scuffing lightly in hay. His gaze wasn't hard now, it had softened, thoughtful, cautious. "I'd be a fool not to hire you," he said. "But taking you on means putting you in my home, in my life. My ranch is my family, my bloodline, my responsibility. Anyone here becomes part of that." Bria swallowed. This wasn't employment paperwork. This was acceptance into a world built on loyalty, not wages. "I'm not here to take anything from you," she said quietly. "I just want a place to work. A place to belong." Colt exhaled a rough breath, as if the idea of belonging was more dangerous than any wild horse. "You'll start full-time at dawn," he said finally. "Cooking, riding, whatever needs doing. Pay is fair. Work is hard. Respect is earned both ways." Bria nodded, but Colt wasn't finished. "And Bria," his voice dipped lower, a warning wrapped in sincerity, "if you stay long enough, this ranch will take root in you. People don't leave Blackstone the same as when they arrived. She held his gaze. Maybe that's what I need. For the first time, Colt allowed himself a small, genuine smile, then welcome to the ranch. What neither of them realized was that this wasn't just a job offer, it was the beginning of something neither had planned. And something Colt had spent years avoiding. A week passed, then another, and Bria settled into the rhythm of Blackstone Ranch as though she'd always belonged there. Her days began before dawn, when the sky was still navy and coyotes howled in the distance. She cooked breakfast in the ranch kitchen, eggs fried in cast iron, biscuits brushed with butter, beans simmering in blackened pots, before heading out to work side by side with the men. Some days meant mending fences, others meant riding cattle across new pasture or hauling feed into town. No job was beneath her, and no challenge scared her off. Where the ranch hands once watched her skeptically, they now nodded with respect when she passed. Tom joked with her. Mason, the oldest rider, tipped his hat like she was family. Even the horses seemed to recognize her confidence, but Colt Blackstone, he remained the hardest animal of all to read. Though he worked around her daily, he kept a careful distance, observing rather than engaging. Not cold, not harsh, just guarded. He'd offer quiet instructions, small nods of approval, occasional half-smiles when she impressed him. But Bria sensed something deeper beneath the restraint, like buried embers refusing to burn. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with ownership, but with a quiet, reluctant tenderness, as though he were afraid to want anything more. One evening, after a long day clearing debris from a dried-up creek bed, the ranch hands disbanded early. Mason organized a game of cards, Tom dragged out his harmonica, and laughter drifted across the yard. Bria found a quiet moment by the corral, brushing down the black stallion she'd calmed on her first week. Fireflies blinked around the fence posts, and the air smelled of sage and warm dust. "You favor that horse." Colt's voice came from behind her. Bria didn't startle this time. She'd learned his footsteps. "He reminds me of myself," she said, stroking the horse's neck. "Wild, stubborn, and ready to bite anyone who gets too close." Colt chuckled under his breath. "Then you two are a matched pair." He leaned against the fence beside her, arms crossed. The setting sun washed him in copper light, outlining his profile like some carved figure from the frontier's oldest stories. For a moment, neither spoke. They just watched the horizon fade into twilight. Bria finally asked, softly, "Why do you keep your distance from people?" Colt's shoulders tensed, but he didn't walk away. "This ranch has taken everyone I ever loved," he said quietly. "My father died patching the west fence in a storm. My brother got thrown from a horse and never walked again. My wife," he stopped. The air shifted. Bria turned her head sharply. "Your wife?" Colt nodded once, eyes fixed on the fading sun. "She passed 3 winters ago. Fever hit hard and fast. I buried her under the cottonwoods by the creek." Silence sat heavy between them. Bria breathed slowly. "I'm sorry, truly." Colt's voice cracked not from weakness, but from a man speaking aloud a grief he rarely allowed air. "I made myself a promise," he said. "No more attachments. No more losing people I care about." Bria's heart twisted not out of jealousy, but empathy. She understood loss too intimately, the ache of loving something the world could take at any moment. She stepped closer, not touching him, just near enough that he could feel her presence. "You're not broken for wanting to protect yourself," she whispered, "but you're still alive, which means you're still meant to feel." Colt finally looked at her, really looked. And in that gaze, the walls he'd built for years trembled. "This ranch changes people," he murmured. "But maybe you're changing me." Bria held his stare, breath caught in her throat. Not a kiss. Not a confession, but a moment charged, fragile, unmistakably intimate. Then, Before the moment could deepen, Colt stepped back, hat lowering over his eyes. "We ride at dawn," he said quietly, voice steadying itself. "Long day tomorrow." He walked away without waiting for a reply. Bria watched him go, one hand resting on the stallion's mane, chest trembling with something new, something dangerous. Not longing, hope. The next week brought rain clouds and the promise of trouble. Cattle prices in the region had dropped. Supplies were running thin, and Blackstone Ranch needed new equipment before the next drive. With the weather turning, Colt decided they'd ride into town at first light, just him. Mason, Tom, and Bria. It would be her first time entering Hollow Creek as part of the ranch, not a nameless wanderer. The thought alone made her stomach knot. Town meant gossip, eyes, questions, and she already sensed how people talked. The ride into Hollow Creek was long and muddy. Colt kept to the front, leading confidently, while Bria rode behind with Tom, who hummed off key and pointed out every passing cloud as though it were a wildlife omen. "You nervous?" he asked, nudging her horse gently. "Should I be?" Tom laughed. "Nervous? No? Prepared? Probably. Folks in town remember his wife. The whole county does." Bria swallowed. She already knew Colt carried grief, but she hadn't realized how public that grief was. Before she could respond, Hollow Creek appeared rows of wooden storefronts, lanterns swaying in the damp wind, horses tied along railings. People emerged the moment they arrived, looking up from barrels and porches, whispering with quick glances, not at the men. At her. Tom leaned closer. "Told ya." Bria lifted her chin and followed Colt into the general store, boots clapping softly on the wooden floor. Inside, the storekeeper, a round-bellied man named Ellis, greeted Colt warmly, but when his gaze shifted to Bria, his brows knit. "Well now? Didn't expect to see a woman riding with your crew, Colt," Ellis said, voice thick with curiosity. "And not just any woman, this one new? Haven't seen her around." Colt didn't rise to the bait. "She works with us now." Ellis looked between Colt and Bria, lips curling in a knowing smirk. "Works with you or stays with you?" The question struck like a slap. Bria stiffened. Colt's tone dropped into a warning drawl. "She draws her own pay and rides her own horse. That's all anyone needs to know." The old man raised his hands defensively, but as Colt walked off to gather rope and tools, Ellis leaned closer to Bria. "You should know, folks talk around here. Once Colt Blackstone lets someone his life people assume that someone's replacing what he lost." Bria kept her eyes trained forward. "I'm not replacing anyone," Ellis whispered. "Try telling them that." After the store, the group stopped at the saloon for a meal. The moment Bria stepped through the swinging doors, conversations dipped into hushes. Women behind the bar stared, some with curiosity, others with judgment sharpened like blades. At a nearby table, two ranch wives whispered not so quietly, "That's the woman staying out on Colt's land? He never let a woman work there even when Mary was alive. Maybe he finally found someone to warm his bed." Bria's jaw tightened. Before she could speak, Colt turned toward the table, his voice calm but iron-edged. "She works. She earns her place. Nothing more." But the women only exchanged looks that said they didn't believe him. Bria pushed her plate away, appetite gone. "What did you expect?" she muttered bitterly. "A welcome banner?" Colt studied her, expression torn, not angry at her, but at what this place demanded of both of them. "I can fight drought, cattle thieves, and storms," he said quietly, "but I can't fight people's tongues." Bria met his eyes. "I don't need you to fight them. I just need you not to regret bringing me here." His expression softened, voice dipping low. "I don't regret it." That simple truth steadied her. Until he added, "But I can't promise what this will look like later. Not cold." Just honest. A man afraid of promises he might not survive breaking Dot as they mounted their horses to leave town. Bria cast one last glance over her shoulder. The saloon doors swung behind them, whispers fading with the wind. She'd come to the ranch for a job, but now the world wanted to define her as something more. And the most dangerous part? A small, quiet part of her heart wanted that too. The storm rolled in just before dawn-dark clouds, wind sharp enough to bend the trees, and thunder low enough to vibrate the ground. By mid-morning, rain had turned the ranch yard into thick mud, and most of the cattle huddled near the southern fence line. Bria spent the early hours hauling tarps over feed bins and tying down equipment, her hair plastered to her face with rain. Colt rode hard across the range, checking vulnerable spots on the property. The storm didn't frighten him, but the damage it could hide did. When he returned, soaked from hat to boots, his expression was harder than rain-soaked leather. "Fences down along the east ridge," he said, voice sharp. "Not from weather. Wire was cut." Bria froze. "Same as the break we found last week?" Colt nodded, jaw tight. "Rustlers. Smart ones. They wait for storms so hoof tracks get washed out." Mason spat into the mud. "Could be that Crowford gang again. They've been lifting cattle southeast." Tom shook his head. "Crowfords aren't that careful. Whoever did this knows this land." Bria's stomach turned. This wasn't random theft, it was calculated. Within an hour, the crew saddled up and rode out, rain lashing their faces. The wind whipped so hard it felt like the land was pushing back. Bria fought to keep her horse steady, water dripping off her hat brim as she scanned the rolling fields. When they reached the east ridge, her breath caught. 3 cattle were missing. A 4th lay bleeding near the fence line, branded hide sliced crudely, as if the thieves tried to remove the mark. "This wasn't just a quick grab," Bria said quietly. "They wanted to erase proof." Colt crouched beside the injured cow, rain pounding against his back. Anger darkened his eyes, anger layered with something deeper, betrayal. "My family worked this land for generations," he murmured. "Whoever's stealing from us knows its value and wants more than cattle." Bria knelt beside him, touching the animal's shoulder gently. "She's in pain. Let me get her up." Colt looked at her, rain dripping from his hat brim, and hesitated. He wasn't used to letting others take lead when things turned dangerous. But finally, he nodded. Bria worked quickly, calming the frightened animal with quiet murmurs while Mason stitched the cut. Tom repaired wire, his gloves slick with mud. The storm raged around them, but something steadier formed in the space between. Bria and Colt trusted without hesitation. As they rode back toward the homestead, lightning split the sky. Suddenly, Bria caught movement near the old oak grove, shadows too large and purposeful to be cattle. "Riders!" she shouted. Colt spun his horse, eyes narrow. 3 figures disappeared into the brush, horses kicking mud. Masked, fast, and familiar with the terrain. Tom reached for his rifle, but Colt lifted a hand. "No guns. Not in this storm. We chase and someone dies." Bria's heart pounded. "We can't just let them go." Colt turned to her, voice low but firm. "I'm not risking men's lives to save cattle. We track them when the weather clears. And when we do, whoever's behind this learns that Blackstone doesn't break." Rain lashed their faces. Thunder boomed. Bria stared into the darkness where the riders vanished. She wasn't afraid of thieves, storms, or long nights on horseback, but the idea that people would attack the ranch deliberately stoked something fierce inside her. This place wasn't just where she worked, she was beginning to defend it. Back at the barn, Colt helped her dismount, his hands brushing her waist, not intentionally intimate, just steadying her through mud and wind. Yet the touch lingered more than either of them expected. "You did good today," he said. voice raw with sincerity. "So did you," she replied, "for a moment." Rain softened into mist and the world fell quiet, just two souls standing close in the storm. United by danger rather than romance. Colt stepped back, forcing distance. "Get dry. We ride at dawn to track them." Bria nodded. But before she left, she said softly, "You're not alone in this fight anymore. You don't have to carry the land by yourself." Colt didn't answer, only watched her go, expression unreadable, heart shifting like thunder beneath skin, because storms didn't just break things. Sometimes they revealed what needed protecting. The night had grown darker than any the small border town ranch had seen in months. Clouds smothered the stars, and only the faint glow from the ranch's lanterns leaked across the dirt paths. Inside the barn, the hushed tension between Clara and Colt felt fragile. One breath too loud, and the moment could shatter. She had nearly agreed to step into his world, into a marriage that felt shockingly real despite barely a day between them. He offered security, purpose, belonging, a future. Yet Clara's mind churned with questions she tried to silence. Outside, someone listened. Colt sensed it first. His hand hovered near the holster tied to his thigh, fingers instinctively brushing the grip. The old barn instinctively turned into a battleground. Clara saw his muscles tense, but she didn't yet know why. "Don't move," he whispered, voice quiet and hard as iron. Clara froze. She could hear nothing, not yet, just her heartbeat thumping in her chest. The hay rustled softly as she stepped backward, but Colt moved forward like a wolf on familiar terrain. The doors creaked faintly from a breeze. Or something else. A shadow near the water trough shifted. Colt's gun was up in a second. The motion fluid danger was a language he spoke fluently. Clara gasped, her hand covering her mouth. She didn't know whether to run or to trust him completely. "Who's there?" Colt barked, voice deep and commanding. Silence. Then a figure stepped into the lantern glow, hands up in surrender. It wasn't one man. It was three. Their clothes were travel-worn, dust clinging to their coats, boots scraped raw by long miles. They had the look of ranchers, but Clara had seen enough strangers in her rough travels to know outward appearances could deceive. One of them, tall and sharp-eyed, looked directly at Colt with a familiarity that sent unease down her spine. "We came to talk," the leader said calmly. Colt didn't lower the gun. "No one comes sneaking around my land in the middle of the night to talk. State your business." The man looked Clara up and down, and the glance lingered too long. Colt stepped subtly in front of her, shielding her from their eyes. She felt a jolt of startling gratitude and something deeper at the instinctive protection. "We heard you brought a new woman here," the man said. "Thought we should see for ourselves." Clara's stomach tightened. "News travels fast here. Too fast." Colt's voice dropped to something far colder. "You're not here for curiosity. Say the real reason." The man exchanged glances with his companions before speaking again. "We work for the man offering a bounty for her. Seems she didn't tell you everything." Clara's breath left her body. Her secret, the one she prayed she could bury on this ranch, now stood exposed in the open night. Colt lowered the gun only slightly, eyes narrowing with deadly intent. He didn't look at Clara yet. He didn't ask questions. The rage forming in his jawline said enough. He wasn't angry she had secrets. He was angry she was being hunted. "You're trespassing on my land," Colt said quietly, voice like a blade. "You leave now. And if you come back, I'll bury the three of you where you stand." The men did not argue. They backed away slowly, watching Clara the entire time. As they retreated down the dark road, the leader called back, "She won't be your wife long. Not once he comes for her himself." The night swallowed them. Clara trembled. Colt finally turned to her, eyes softened but brimming with questions she knew she owed answers to. She just didn't know if he would still want her once he heard the truth. The barn felt emptier after the strangers disappeared into the night, but the air did not return to peace. Instead, a nerving quiet settled between Clara and Colt, one filled not with distance, but with the weight of truth demanding to be spoken. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, chilled not by the night air, but by the fear that every step forward might turn him into another person who walked away. Colt didn't look furious, he looked wounded, protective, confused. A man trying to understand how something that felt so right could already be tangled in danger. "You want to tell me what's going on?" he asked finally, voice low but steady. Not an accusation, an invitation. Clara held his gaze a moment, her throat tight. She had run for months. From towns, from debts, from lies, from men who thought her desperation made her property. She had come west believing she could start over if she just kept quiet. But no truth stays buried forever, not when someone with power wants to dig it up. "I never lied," she whispered. "I just didn't tell you." "Not telling is still hiding," Colt said, but softer than she expected. "And if someone's hunting you, I need to know why." She sank onto a bale of hay, fingers trembling. Colt sat beside her, not crowding her, but close enough for her to feel his warmth, a silent promise that he was there, for now. Clara finally spoke. "I worked at a boarding house back east. The owner, a man with money, influence, wanted more than my work. When I refused, he forged papers claiming I stole from him, claimed I belonged to him. As repayment." Colt's jaw locked. Rage simmered quiet and lethal. "He sent men after me. Not to bring me to court, he doesn't want justice. He wants ownership. The bounty isn't legal, it's personal." Colt leaned back, eyes burning with realization. "That's why you ran. Why you were desperate for any job. Why you can't go back." Clara nodded, tears welling. "I thought if I got far enough, it would end." "It never ends," Colt said. "Not till someone stops him." Clara wiped her face and looked up at him. "Now you know. If you still want me gone by sunrise." But Colt cut her off, voice rough with conviction. "No, I want you safe. And I'm not letting any man lay claim to you like your stock to be bought." His hand reached out slow enough to give her a choice. She took it. He squeezed her hand gently, then spoke the words again, but different this time. Stripped of teasing, stripped of flirtation, carrying the solemn weight of vow. "You'll have a place here if you stay. Not because you owe me. Not because I want a wife tonight. But because no woman should have to stand alone in a fight like this." Clara exhaled, a relief so deep it bordered on tears. The proposal, once laced with heat and tension, now felt like something deeper. A promise, a merging of futures, a shield forged by choice rather than demand. She leaned her forehead against his shoulder. He rested a hand gently at the back of her head, protective in a way that felt safer than any home she ever knew. Outside, the wind whispered across the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, hooves echoed on the road, the sound of riders returning to their master with news, ensuring trouble would come soon. But this time, Clara wasn't running. This time, she had someone beside her. And when danger reached the ranch again, she would face it as more than a frightened girl fleeing her past. She would face it as Colt's partner, maybe even his wife, not because she was claimed, but because she finally chose to stay.